My story starts, oh man, I don't even know where. So I always wanted to be a Marine. My grandfather used to give me a lot of books about Vietnam, and I admired those guys and what they went through and the camaraderie of them. And so I always knew I was going to do that. And 3 days after high school, I did just that and joined the Marine Corps. And I went to, my first deployment was Iraq. That was generally a fairly, what I call it, easy deployment. It was more like a peacekeeping mission, a lot of humanitarian aid stuff. But my second deployment was vastly different. That was in 2010 to Afghanistan for the push into Helmand Province, and that deployment started out with firefights and didn't end until there was more firefights. It just never quit. And halfway through that deployment, there was a guy, Kevin Cornelius, who was lower ranked than me, but myself and everybody else that knew him, we all looked up to him. He was that guy who was always giving himself. We'd lose one guy, he'd get wounded or die, and Kevin would pick up his billet as radio operator, as truck driver. It didn't matter. He was doing it, and he was the happiest guy out of all of us, always cracking jokes, and had a great attitude. And one thing I really admired about Kevin was his commitment to his beliefs. I just really respected for him because he wouldn't back down, and he wouldn't let anybody tell him otherwise. It was what he believed, and he let you know it, and he showed it in everything that he did. He gave me a book one time called, or actually this week, called that I'm talking about, called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And I remember reading it and thinking, maybe there's something more to this than I thought. But it didn't go past that, and I just moved on as whatever. That week, another guy, Freddie, who was another great guy, another joker, he ended up getting hit by an ID and died. And so the next week we went to battalion headquarters for the memorial, as well as to talk to Admiral, who had flown out to see me and 4 or 5 other guys for some things that we had been doing in our area of operations that was getting recognition throughout Afghanistan. And so we wanted to see what we were doing. So we briefed him, and in the middle of the brief, Cornelius, he, in his not afraid of anybody self, just jumps up and mouths off to the Admiral, I see this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Admiral's just sitting there like, what in the world? Who is this kid? And that was Kevin. He was afraid of nobody. And after that meeting, the Admiral was flying away, and I remember we were gearing up to leave, and Kevin came running out of the headquarters building, and all he was saying was, they're in the wire, they're in the wire. And he had this huge grin on his face because he loved to fight. And sure enough, as soon as he said that, the sirens for the base went off, and all we could hear was gunfire up the hill. So we grabbed our gear and we started running up to where the gunfire was. And what had happened was there were some prisoners that broke out, killed all the guards, and they tried shooting down the Admiral as he flew away, because I knew somebody high profile was there because of the helicopter he flew in on. And after that, they had barricaded themselves back in their prison cells and just planned to fight it out until they died. And we didn't know this at the time, but we ran up there just hearing the gunfire, and that was our job. So when we got up there, we formed a stack, just a line of guys to make entry into the prison courtyard. There was only one way in and out of this courtyard, and the prisoners in their cells could see that entrance. And they had a direct line of sight, and they started shooting through it, anybody that came through it. And so we had to go through it. And as we pushed up to the right of this entrance into the prison, there was a guard post. And I remember seeing 2 Afghani guards that were sitting in there. And I remember stepping in front of the entrance to the prison courtyard and yelling at them, "Za, za," which means go. And as they ran off, I turned And when I turned, there was Kevin on the ground, and that smile was gone. All emotion had left his body, and I knew that he wasn't there anymore. We pulled him back. Doc started working on him, and I was furious. And so I formed another stack of guys to go in, now knowing where those prisoners were at. But the prisoners also knew that we knew too, so they started firing more than they ever had through that entrance. And there was so much fire, the wood was splintering, and the entrance, and so we turned right into that guard post. And the entrance to the guard post, as you'd have it, was a visible line of sight for the prisoners. So they started shooting into the entrance of the guard post, and we couldn't get out of that. We were trapped in it. We heard 50 cal up, which is the big machine gun. That's the big boy we got. And we're like, thank God, they're going to finally shoot through the walls of these prison cells and take these guys out. Thinking they were going to shoot through the long axis of the building, but they didn't. They shot through the short axis, not knowing we were on the direct other side. And they didn't suppress the prisoners either. So now we're getting shot at by the prisoners and the 50 cal of our own guys. And there was no room for me behind cover inside that guard post, so I'm just sitting there at the entrance of that guard post in a little corner, curled up in a ball as tight as I could possibly get, trying to get as small as I possibly could. But I knew I was going to die in that moment. I knew there was absolutely nothing I could do. And I was at peace with it, because I knew that I couldn't do anything about it. But I remember thinking back to Kevin, and I remember thinking, if ever there was a good time to pray, I better start doing it now. And so I'm praying, and at this time, all I could hear was cracking all around me. So bullets, when they go by you, when they're a little distance away, you hear the zip, like you hear in the movies. You hear the zing, zing, zing. Those never really worried me too much, because those were usually far enough off. But when they start cracking, you're hearing them break the sound barrier. It means they're close enough where you can hear them break the sound barrier. They're usually within a couple feet. And all I could hear was cracking and popping all around me. And so I started praying, and I remember praying, God, take care of Jenna, my wife. Help her to move on from this and find somebody happy, or that makes her happy. And when I finished those words, there was this huge smack on the side of my face, and I didn't know what it was, and this boom. And then everything went completely quiet. And I opened my eyes, and I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me from all the dust and debris that was kicked up in the air. And then I could start hearing the prisoners screaming, and everything was coming back, and I realized that I was alive, and it didn't make any possible sense, but I moved on. We continued on throughout the day. We took care of the prisoners, and 2 days later, we came back for the memorial for Kevin and all the other guys that died. And I decided to go back up to that guard post and look and see what it looked like. You don't get many of these opportunities to see what a firefight looked like afterwards. And I looked in that guard post. When I looked in that corner where I was curled up in a ball, the only thing I could see was a silhouette of bullets around where I'd been curled up. And right next to my head was a massive hole from a 50 cal bullet, which is what I felt that huge slap, because I felt the trajectory and the force of it as it's going by slap me in the face. It was so close. And I knew at that moment that God had saved my life. And I hated him for it. So I said, why would you save me and let Kevin die when he was the one that just told me about you? What kind of God is this? And so that's how I went home from deployment. I was pissed off. I was furious. I hated God. Hated the idea of a God. I hated the world. I hated everybody in it. I did everything I could to push those that loved me away, to protect them from me, or so I thought. Became an alcoholic, drug addict, attempted suicide. Did everything I could. And finally that came to a head about, at the end of 2017, coming into 2018, and my wife had finally had enough. And we got in a fight before going on this family trip, and she made it very clear that she was going to contact a divorce lawyer, and it was over. And once I had finally realized I'd truly pushed her away, I didn't want that. And I racked my brain. I went on that family trip because I knew I wasn't going to live through the weekend if I didn't. And I remember pacing around in this hotel room trying to figure out if there was any way I could manage to salvage this, if there was any way I could get out of this. And I couldn't come up with anything. And I went home, and I remember sitting on the couch, and I remember very clearly the words that came to mind, and it was, "You've tried to find purpose and joy in everything in this world, but you've never once truly turned to me." And I knew who was talking to me. I knew that was God. And so I did. I turned everything over to Him. I had nothing much to give, but I gave it all to Him. And the only thing He kept telling me to do was be honest in who you are, own up to the consequences of the things that you've done, and keep seeking me. And so I did. And He restored my life and my marriage. It's now better than it's ever been. And He answered that prayer. He answered that prayer that I was in the guard post and prayed. And He gave my wife someone to be happy with again. 6 months after that, I went on this youth retreat, and the guys that I was leading, I didn't know how to talk to them. I couldn't figure out how to get through to them, and for whatever reason, I decided to tell them this story that morning. And I finished the story with the part where I got to, and I hated God. I realized that moment God saved my life, and I hated Him. And I had never really, I don't think, said that out loud, or it never really resonated with me. And when I said that, I stopped, and I couldn't really, it dawned on me. We went to service, and the pastor was talking about what it meant to be in Christ, and going through her, praying with her, and I'm just not getting what she's saying. I'm getting frustrated. I'm starting to cry, and she says, I feel like if you're a leader right now, I'm not going to talk to the kids, but if you're a leader right now and you feel the need to respond somewhere or talk to somebody, I want you to stand. I didn't even think about it. I just stood up, and I'm crying, bawling my eyes out at this point. And she said, "There's a name that's in my mind that I'm thinking about. That's Jeremiah." And at that moment, I lifted my head and I opened my eyes and I looked around in the stadium of 3,000 some people. I'm the only one standing. It's like, "All right, you got my attention. What do you want?" And nothing. And I sat back down, still crying, because now I'm even more frustrated. "What do you want?" And everybody starts singing. Next thing I know, I feel this hand on my back. And I look over, and it's this girl. She can't be more than 15. I'm like, man, this just got really weird. She's sitting there consoling me, and I can't hear a word she's saying because the music's so loud, and I don't know what she's saying, and I'm getting more frustrated. And I remember I look away, and as soon as I turn back to her and I look at her, everything goes quiet again, just like in that guard post. And I could hear her plain as day, and she said, "You're worth it." And I thought back to that story that I just told those guys that morning. And I knew why Kevin was so happy all the time. I knew why he wasn't afraid of anybody. Because I knew that he knew he had value, and now I knew that too. And this wasn't a revelation just from that one event that I constantly racked over my head. This healed me of a lifetime of growing up thinking I had no value for one reason or another. Whether I told myself that or I felt like somebody else told me that. I knew that I had value. So now what I'm doing with this story and what I'm doing with my life is I'm looking for those people that you can see they don't think they have much value. And I'm letting them know that they do. I don't care what they've done. I don't care who they are, where they come from. They got value. And I'll forever be grateful for Kevin showing me that. Thank you.